Eddie was the kind of man who carried silence in his eyes. You know the type, the ones who walk into a room and somehow make less noise than the shadows themselves. He wasn't always like that, or at least that's what the fragments of his past suggest. But by the time you would have met him, if you had, the spark was already dimmed, the fight already leaving his bones. He lived like a ghost long before he ever became one. His story is not unique. And maybe that's the tragedy of it. Because there are millions of people like Eddie, people who quietly give up on life long before anyone notices. They fade not with a dramatic collapse, but with a slow, quiet erosion of hope. And if you look closely, you might even recognize pieces of yourself in him. Eddie grew up in a small town tucked somewhere between quiet roads and factory smoke. His father worked double shifts. His mother tried to keep the family together with tired hands and a strained smile. There wasn't much tenderness in his house, but there wasn't much cruelty either. Just the cold indifference of survival. That's the first thing you learn in stories like Eddie's. Sometimes it's not the storms that break people. It's the constant drizzle, the unrelenting grayness of an ordinary struggle. As a boy, Eddie used to dream. He dreamed of being an artist, of filling sketchbooks with worlds no one had ever seen. But his drawings taped to the refrigerator with cheap magnets were always treated as childish distractions. That's nice, his parents would say, but never more than that. Praise was rationed like bread in his house. And slowly, almost invisibly, he started believing what the world suggested, that his passions were not practical, that his worth was measured only in what he could endure, not what he could create. By the time he was a teenager, those sketchbooks had disappeared, replaced by long hours working part-time jobs. Statistics show that young people who are forced to take on adult responsibilities too early often experience higher levels of stress, depression, and burnout later in life. Eddie was a living proof of that. His childhood ended not with a bang, but with a time card punched into a machine. Still, he tried. He kept pushing forward. That's another important detail. People like Eddie don't give up all at once. They give up gradually. First on small things, then on medium things, and eventually on the big ones. Eddie gave up on his dream of college, then on friendships that required too much effort, then on love. Because why risk heartbreak when numbness was easier? Every surrender made the next one simpler. By his 20 eyes, Eddie was surviving but not living. He woke up, went to work, came home, scrolled through his phone, and slept day after day, year after year. The algorithm served him an endless rotation of distractions, funny clips, tragic news, fleeting pleasures, and slowly his nervous system adapted to this new kind of fragmented reality where emotions were scattered like puzzle pieces that never formed a whole. He wasn't alone in this. Studies from the last 2 decades show a sharp rise in anxiety and depression, particularly among young adults, coinciding with the rise of social media and overstimulation. Eddie wasn't defective. He was reacting exactly the way a human being reacts when submerged in chaos. But here's the thing. When you're in the middle of it, it never feels systemic. It feels personal. Eddie thought his numbness was his fault, his inability to feel joy, his lack of motivation, his endless fatigue. He believed these were signs of some fundamental flaw inside him. And so, Eddie gave up. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 tiny choices. He stopped returning calls from old friends. He stopped cooking real meals. He stopped cleaning his apartment until dishes piled like monuments to neglect. And eventually, he stopped looking in the mirror because he couldn't stand the eyes that stared back. Now, if you were to meet Eddie then, you might not have noticed. He still smiled politely at work. He still nodded along in conversations. He still said, "I'm fine," when asked how he was doing. Because giving up doesn't always look like falling apart. Sometimes it looks like functioning. Sometimes it looks like a person who is quietly erasing themselves while still wearing the mask of normality. And here's the brutal truth. Society rarely notices people like Eddie until it's too late. We live in a world that rewards productivity, not presence. As long as Eddie showed up to work, paid his bills, and stayed out of trouble, no one asked if he was okay. And when they did, they wanted the short answer, not the real one. That's one of the cruelties of modern life. We are surrounded by people, but many of us are deeply alone. But let's pause here. Let's step back from Eddie's personal story and look at the bigger picture. Because Eddie's life, as heartbreaking as it is not just the story of one man. It's the story of a culture that quietly teaches people to give up. Consider this. Research from the World Health Organization shows that depression is now the leading cause of disability worldwide. Over 300 million people are affected. Anxiety disorders follow closely behind. These aren't just statistics. They are reflections of millions of lives like Eddie's. Lives where hope slowly withers under the weight of pressure, disconnection, and relentless expectations. And yet most solutions offered are directed inward. Fix yourself, heal yourself, optimize yourself. Take a pill, download an app, read a book, do some breathing exercises. And while those tools can help, they also reinforce a dangerous idea that the problem is solely you, that your sadness is a malfunction instead of what it really is, a very human response to an overwhelming reality. Eddie never learned that. He thought he was broken, and because he believed he was broken, he never asked for help. He never told anyone the full depth of his despair. He just faded. But what if we looked at Eddie's life differently? What if instead of seeing him as a man who failed to cope, we saw him as a mirror reflecting back the cracks in our systems, our communities, our culture? Maybe Eddie wasn't weak. Maybe he was just unbearably human in a world that keeps demanding we act like machines. And this is where the lesson begins to unfold. Giving up on life is rarely about laziness or weakness. More often, it's about exhaustion. It's about people who carry more than they can possibly hold until their spirit quietly fractures under the weight. So, let's return to Eddie sitting in his dimly lit apartment, scrolling endlessly on his phone. Imagine him pausing for a moment, staring at the glow of the screen, reflecting on his tired face. Deep down, a small whisper tells him that something is terribly off, that this can't be all there is. But the whisper is faint, drowned out by the noise of distraction. And Eddie, like so many of us, keeps scrolling. The question is, how many Eddies are out there right now? How many people are quietly giving up, thinking it's their fault, when really it's the inevitable result of an overstimulated, disconnected, and profit-driven world? That's the tragedy. But it's also the beginning of something else. Because once you see it, once you understand that Eddie's story is not a personal failing, but a collective one, you can never unsee it. You begin to ask new questions. You begin to look for real answers. And maybe, just maybe, you begin to realize that Eddie's story is not just his. It's ours. Eddie's story doesn't end in that apartment. At least not yet. Because when someone gives up on life, the story isn't really about the final collapse. It's about what happens in the silence before it. That silence is where the deepest lessons hide. You see, when Eddie sat there night after night staring at the ceiling, it wasn't that he wanted to stop existing. What he really wanted was for the pain to stop existing. And that distinction matters because research shows that the vast majority of people who feel like giving up don't actually want to end their lives. They want to end their suffering. They want a way out of the endless loop of exhaustion, emptiness, and quiet despair. Eddie's suffering was born from two things: disconnection from himself and disconnection from others. He had forgotten who he once was. That little boy with the sketchbooks, and he had no one in his life reminding him of it. Psychologists often describe this as loss of coherence. When your life story no longer feels like it makes sense when the past and the present don't connect to a meaningful future, the human mind begins to shut down. That's what was happening to Eddie. But here's the twist. Eddie wasn't weak for feeling this way. He was deeply human. In fact, some of the greatest thinkers in history have gone through similar moments of despair. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once described despair as the sickness unto death, not because it literally kills you, but because it suffocates your spirit. And yet, he also argued that despair can become the starting point of transformation, because it forces you to confront the truth of your existence. So maybe Eddie's silence wasn't just emptiness. Maybe it was the ground clearing before something new could be built. Let's imagine Eddie one morning. He wakes up same as always, but something small shifts. Maybe it's the way sunlight cuts through his blinds differently. Maybe it's a random memory of his old drawings. Maybe it's just the exhaustion of being exhausted. Whatever it is, he feels a faint pull, a reminder that life wasn't always this gray. And here's the part we often miss. Recovery doesn't begin with a miracle. It begins with a whisper. For Eddie, that whisper was the realization that he didn't actually want to disappear. He wanted to feel alive again. This is where the educational side of his story matters. Studies in psychology show that one of the most powerful antidotes to despair is connection. Not necessarily therapy, not necessarily medication, though those can help, but simple human connection. Talking to someone, being seen by someone, being reminded that you are not invisible. It's astonishing how many people report that the single moment that saved them was a conversation, a hug, or even a stranger's kindness. So, let's imagine Eddie reaching out hesitantly, awkwardly, to an old friend. Maybe he just says, "Hey, do you want to grab coffee?" That moment, small as it seems, is rebellion. It is him choosing, however shakily, to step back toward life. And once again, research confirms this. The smallest acts of reaching out often break the cycle of isolation and spark a slow upward spiral. But the deeper lesson here is not just about Eddie. It's about us. Because Eddie could be anyone. Your neighbor, your coworker, the stranger you passed on the bus. And sometimes Eddie could even be you. Which is why his story forces us to ask how many people around us are quietly fading while we remain too distracted to notice. Modern culture doesn't make this easy. We live in a world that constantly tells us to be self-sufficient, to handle our problems privately, to curate an image of strength. But human beings were never meant to carry their burdens alone. Anthropologists argue that for most of history, survival itself depended on deep community bonds. To be isolated back then was to die. Today, isolation kills in a slower way. It eats away at our spirit. And yet, the path back is still the same. Community, connection, shared humanity. Eddie's brutal past, then, is not just a warning. It's a teaching. It shows us what happens when someone is stripped of meaning, connection, and self-worth. But it also shows us where the doorway back can be found. Because even in the darkest silence, the faintest memory of love, creativity, or connection can begin to pull someone toward the light. This is the profound juncture where the timeless wisdom of philosophy converges with the practical insights of psychology, where the search for a reason to exist meets the daily work of existing. The thinker Nietzsche once offered a piercing insight that cuts to the very core of the human condition. He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. This single, potent statement illuminates the fundamental nature of Eddie's struggle with stunning clarity. Eddie's primary problem was never merely the crushing weight of his individual struggles, the long hours, the financial pressures, or the loneliness. The true, hollowing void at the center of his existence was the profound and utter absence of a why. He had lost the thread of meaning in his own story. The narrative of his life had become a series of disconnected, monotonous events with no overarching purpose, no central theme to give the hardship a sense of direction or value. He was adrift in a sea of hows. How to get through the day, how to pay the bills, how to endure the silence, without a single why to serve as his guiding star, his North Star in the overwhelming darkness. But here lies the most crucial and empowering turning point in this understanding. Meaning is not a passive treasure one simply stumbles upon by chance, like finding a lost coin on the sidewalk. It is not a destination you arrive at after a long journey. Meaning is something you actively, consciously, and daily build. It is a structure you erect, brick by brick, with your choices, your attentions, and your actions. It is forged in the small, seemingly insignificant moments where you choose what matters. This realization, that he was not a helpless passenger waiting for meaning to find him, but the active architect of his own purpose, this was the shift that could and did begin to change everything for Eddie. So let us imagine Eddie again. Not in the immediate aftermath of his crisis, but months later. The scars are still there, tender to the touch. The fatigue is still a familiar companion, a low hum in his bones. A true fairy tale transformation has not occurred, but something intangible, something deep within the tectonic plates of his soul, has irrevocably shifted. He finds himself, almost without thinking, picking up a pencil. He starts sketching again, not with the ambition of creating a masterpiece for a gallery, not for the fleeting approval of his parents or the world, but for a far more fundamental reason. Because the simple, physical act of moving graphite across a textured page reminds him of a part of himself he had long forgotten. It reacquaints him with who he is at his core, someone who observes, who feels, who creates. He starts meeting with that one old friend more often, not for profound, life-changing conversations every time, but sometimes just for the shared, comfortable silence over a cup of coffee, for the simple, healing medicine of presence. He starts taking small, deliberate walks outside, not as a form of intense exercise, but just to feel the caress of the wind on his face, to notice the stubborn green of a weed pushing through a crack in the pavement, to remember that he is a physical being in a vast, living world. Individually, these actions are quiet, humble, unspectacular. They do not fix everything. They do not erase his past, solve all his financial worries, or fill his life with constant joy. But collectively, they begin to perform a quiet miracle. They start to weave coherence back into the frayed tapestry of his life. They become the new threads that connect one day to the next, creating a pattern that slowly, gradually, starts to make sense again. They are the practical, tangible building blocks of his new why. And here is the unvarnished, authentic truth of Eddie's ongoing story. It is still hard. There is no magical conclusion where life suddenly stops being difficult. The waves of challenge and sadness still come. But he has learned something vital, something that has rewired his entire understanding of his own suffering. He now understands, in his bones, that his desire to give up was never really about the inherent weakness of character. It was not a moral failing. It was the inevitable human consequence of being profoundly disconnected from his own passions, from genuine community, from the natural world, from a sense of purpose. And with that understanding comes the most hopeful corollary of all, that reconnection, however fragile it may feel at first, however tentative those first steps might be, is always, always possible. It is a path that remains open, waiting only for the courage to take the next small healing step. If you take nothing else from the quiet, crumbling landscape of Eddie's life, please take this one fundamental, life-altering truth into the deepest chambers of your heart. Despair is not the end. It is not the final, grim verdict on your existence, nor is it the ultimate failure of your character. Despair is a signal. It is a desperate internal alarm bell clanging in the hushed spaces of your soul, a signal that something in your life has gone profoundly, deeply out of balance. It is the psyche's equivalent of a blazing red light on a control panel, indicating that a core system, be it connection, purpose, rest, or self-worth, is critically overloaded and failing. It is the body's final, exhausted whisper when the mind has refused to listen to all the other, quieter pleas for help. And if you can find the courage, even a trembling, minuscule amount of it, to truly listen to that signal, to sit with its painful message instead of frantically trying to silence it with numbness or self-recrimination, if you can resist the overwhelming, culturally ingrained urge to blame yourself, to see this suffering as evidence of a personal, fundamental flaw, and instead, with immense compassion, turn your gaze outward and inward to seek genuine connection and authentic meaning, you can begin, step by fragile step, to step back into life. You can start the slow, non-linear, and often messy process of realignment, of healing the fractures between who you are and how you are forced to live. Right now, in this very moment, as you absorb these words, maybe you recognize some haunting echo of Eddie's silence in yourself. Maybe you feel the ghost of that same weight settling on your own shoulders, a familiar pressure that makes getting out of bed in the morning feel like a monumental task. Maybe you have felt that same subtle, insidious temptation to fade, to become a little less present, to mute your own colors so you don't stand out or feel so much, to slowly erase the vibrant, wanting parts of yourself to better fit into a world that feels cold and demanding. You may have found yourself scrolling mindlessly into the late hours, feeling both overstimulated and utterly empty, or saying, "I'm fine," with a smile that feels like a crack in your own facade. If that is true, if any part of Eddie's journey resonates with the quiet, unspoken struggles within you, then let this story be a lifeline. Let it remind you, with the force of 1,000 truths, that you are not broken. You are not defective, a malfunctioning machine in a world of efficient, happy people. You are human, beautifully, messily, vulnerably human. And being human means you are wired, deep in your very DNA, for resilience, for connection, for renewal. Your spirit, however battered, possesses an innate capacity to heal, to find its way back to the light, just as a plant will stubbornly turn toward the sun. It is your birthright. Eddie's past was brutal, yes, a testament to the slow, grinding wear of indifference and isolation. But it was never the whole story. It was merely a chapter, a dark and difficult season, but not the entire book of his existence. Because beneath all that accumulated silence, beneath the layers of neglect and the dust of forgotten dreams, there was always a truth waiting, patiently and persistently, to be remembered. It was the truth of that little boy with the sketchbook, the truth of a capacity for wonder and creation that never fully vanished, only hibernated. It is the same truth that resides in you, an ember that no storm can completely extinguish. That life, however fragile it may feel in your hands, however heavy it may seem on your heart, with all its pain, its complexity, its staggering disappointments, and its fleeting, breathtaking beauties, is still, always, worth stepping back into. It is worth the terrifying vulnerability of reaching out for a coffee, worth the awkward first stroke of a pencil on a blank page, worth the simple, courageous act of looking in the mirror and meeting your own eyes with a promise of kindness. The world needs the unique, irreplaceable song that only you can sing. And maybe, just maybe, this reminder, this validation of your struggle, and this affirmation of your inherent worth is the exact, specific truth that your soul, or the soul of someone you know, desperately needs to hear right now, in this moment, to take that first trembling breath toward a new dawn.